Suede, please.
Hey, you know what I'm in the mood for? A really specific episode of What's New Scooby-Doo that always stood out to me as a kid. When I looked into it, I realized it actually has some connection to a classic episode from the 70s as well. So I decided, what's better than a video talking about just one episode? A video where we talk about and compare two episodes from two distinct eras, and ensuring that even if you have a preference between one or the other, there's still something here for you today. Maybe there's even some connections you never knew about that we can get into. If you love the Scariest Villains miniseries on the channel, you might even consider this a fun double feature entry in that, because I'd argue that both of these villains fit nicely. One even made it into the museum in Monsters Unleashed, and smashing these eras together might help to transition us away from being stuck in just the classic era for the majority of this year, so we can get groovy in the modern age again. I think you'll like the video coming up after this one as well, as we plant our feet in the future of tomorrow. Or maybe the future of a couple decades ago by now, but it's today and we are here to play sports, something I've never done a day in my life. I'm sure we can figure it out though. Let's get into our first episode we're looking at today. What's New Scooby-Doo Season 1, Episode 14, the season finale, originally aired March 22nd, 2003. This episode is titled The Unnatural. Immediately, this is a referential pun deriving from The Natural, the 1952 baseball novel and its 1984 film adaptation. Outside of the eventual complete season set, the episode hit home video first on June 14th, 2005, in the 5th volume DVD for the series, Sports Spooktacular. Each volume would be named after and centered around a specific episode on that volume, and obviously this was chosen to be the face of 5. Like many of you who grew up with this as your current show airing as a kid like myself, I had all the individual volumes including this one. And out of all of them, this is the one that stuck out to me even then. There was something eerie about this guy's design, to the point where I felt naturally drawn to this DVD and watching this episode more frequently despite how bored and disinterested I am in sports normally. I'm sure this episode and the baseball Specter would have stuck with me regardless, but this cover art really cemented it in my mind forever. It's honestly the first image that comes to mind when I even think of this particular series. It's that iconic to me, and I'm probably not entirely alone, because a decade ago back in 2015, we even got a book adaptation of this episode, despite it being so long after it had aired even at the time. The episode has no shortage of stars either. We'll be getting into one of them more later, but on theme with the sport at hand, Mike Piazza, former all-star baseball catcher, voices himself here in a cameo to start. If you're like me, you might recognize Steve Bloom best as Spike in Cowboy Bebop, and he's both JT Page and Steve Powell here. Kathy Griffin is even randomly here as Autumn Summerfield. It all sounds pretty juicy, so let's really dig into this nostalgic event together. The episode opens up at Cookie Company International Park, where absolute cutie patootie Luis Santiago is practicing. He's interrupted by fog that leads to our baseball Specter walking out, warning him that everyone will suffer if he tries to break his record. He then starts throwing some fireballs, nearly taking us out with the cold open. A new fresh day, the gang are arriving, Daphne recalling that this used to be called Potter Stadium. Thelma informs her Potter Stadium's 100-year-old foundation gave out and sank into the ground. Cookie Company International Park was built right on top of the old stadium. Fred is super psyched to meet Luis, the best long ball hitter today according to him, one home run away from beating the all-time record. Scooby sees Mr. Grizz, the Grizzlies team mascot, mistaking it for a real bear who he attacks, the poor guy falling over.
Like usually it takes a lot longer before we're unmasking people.
Thelma recognizes him as JT Page, a pitcher on the team, but Daphne recalls him being cut for throwing a burrito at someone in the stands. His only option to stay was to be the mascot. Fred explains he won the Meet Luis Santiago contest, and JT points him out. Cutie Patootie is being interviewed by Bob Taylor, whose voice actor is a pretty big deal here. If you watch this episode and he sounds familiar to you, it's because he's John Stephenson, who voiced probably like 90% of the villains in classic Scooby. This was a pretty unique return to the franchise for him, one of his last times before he passed away, and it's kind of amazing to hear his iconic voice in a modern iteration of the series. We have more to say on him throughout the video, so don't forget that. Bob asks Luis about the drought he's in, and Luis says Bob should understand how it goes since he's a former baseball player himself. Fred introduces himself and the gang, and then fanboys all over Luis, while the others understandably ditch. Meanwhile, it seems Shelly, working the concessions, has a crush on Shaggy and gave him some free food, with more to come. As the night's game continues, it starts to rain, but this fancy stadium has a retractable roof in place for times like this. Luis doesn't even try to hit the ball on his turn, the fog returning as the baseball Specter enters to enact his revenge, blowing the lights out. He throws some fireballs at the gang, and then vanishes into his fog. Luis finally explains what's been going on and why he's been faking his slump, and he believes the ghost belongs to Cab Craig, the all-time home run leader. Autumn Summerfield, his publicist, is not exactly thrilled with the current turn of events, but they are all over the news, and she's hoping to take advantage of that while this is hot. Luis dismisses her, while Fred promises to solve the mystery for him. Velma, set on checking out the exploding lights, lights first. The trio secure themselves with ropes to get close to them, finding a generator too small to run the lights, but certainly capable of overloading them if they were already running, hence the exploding. While the boys decide to bury some food for later out in the field, they uncover a hatch that opens up and drops them down. With a flashlight, they realize they're inside the old Potter Stadium that sank into the ground, realizing the Specter must be getting around using these tunnels. Seems they are a little too spot on, because their light lands directly on him, chasing them into a sauna. The trio hear them, but the door is locked, so Fred breaks them out with a baseball bat. The skinny boys finally free. Daphne looks up and notices a light on where it shouldn't be, so they head off to investigate while JT watches. They realize this is where Bob Taylor does his commentating on the games, having been a player himself, Fred even finding his trading card with the gum still attached. Velma goes over his stats, like how he played 7 seasons, 4 through with his left hand, and Fred remembers he was on the same team as Cab Craig. They hear some eerie organ music and find the Specter at work, laughing at them. We end up in our required musical chase sequence from here, and barely escaping with their lives, Autumn snaps a picture, suggesting she thought they were the Specter. She says the idea of a picture of Luis and this ghost together being great publicity hit her while driving home. Daphne calls her lie on this though, because it's still raining out there, and Autumn's suede shoes were perfectly dry. Speaking of, someone starts opening the retractable roof to let the rain in and ruin the game tomorrow. Side note, this show looked amazing growing up, and it still looks fine on DVD, but watching it in full uncropped HD does not do it any favors. Not only is everyone almost always cross-eyed, but some of these zoomed in shots do not look great, and I love that. They spot the controls for the roof, but the Specter, of course, is out there guarding them. As Fred explains his plan, the Specter wants to know how he factors in as well. They all run out to the roof to escape, and it hits Scooby just how high he is. He tries to make the leap, but it doesn't seem like he's going to reach it, dropping through the air. So Fred grabs one of the ropes and jumps out to give him a safe landing. Velma messes with the roof, knocking the Specter down, who grabs onto the rope and falls through the field. They head down to investigate the catacombs together, and Shaggy, hoping to find Pickles, he instead finds baseballs soaking in kerosene, as in for throwing those flaming fastballs. The next day, JT finally quits at the thought of being shot out of a cannon, and Bob Taylor thinks he should be grateful, since he couldn't get a job near baseball when he left. He did all kinds of jobs after to get by, like giving piano lessons and even a dog groomer, giving an example. They find Luis watching an old film of his idol, Cab Craig, and Velma notices something from the footage. None of the other players showed up today, so Luis supposes they'll have to forfeit, but Velma thinks she has the mystery wrapped up. Also, Fred totally has a crush on Luis. He is so down bad at this point. Following his plan, they all step in for the missing teammates, Scooby in the mascot suit.
Do you think Scoob's okay?
Are you kidding? What a ham.
Nice callback to her always calling him a ham in the original series. Luis only being 1 home run away from breaking the record, the Specter returns with his fireballs, but Daphne turns on the sprinklers, wetting it before it can reach him. Shaggy then starts shooting baseballs at him, but also everywhere else. Just as planned, the ghost falls into the cannon, but the button doesn't seem to be working. They look in and end up getting shot out with him into the net, but at least they got him. Velma points up to the screen for the big unmasking, revealing Bob Taylor. Firstly, he revealed earlier that he had given piano lessons, similar to the ghost playing the organ. But what really sealed things for Velma was that Cab Craig was right-handed, as seen in the footage, but the ghost is left-handed just like Bob. Cab was Bob's friend, and he wanted his record to stand forever. Daphne wonders about the suspicious behavior exhibited by Autumn, but it turns out she just comes prepared with multiple shoes.
Wow! I thought I was the only one who did that.
Things continuing without a haunting now, Shelly offers some more free food to Shaggy, and we get our Mike Piazza cameo.
I came here to see if Luis can break the record.
Would you like some food, Mike?
Sure, what have you got? Actually, I just ate.
Luis steps up to the plate and instantly breaks the record, taking his hat off to wave to the meddling kids.
Scooby-Doo!
And that's The Unnatural. It really does still hold up as a solid episode of this series, with all the best hallmarks. The clues seem obvious enough to figure out without necessarily being incredibly overwhelming. The Specter has a memorable design that has definitely stuck with me over time, and even with how intimidating he can be, there's still plenty of humor in this episode. Luis isn't necessarily all that special, but I really like his design. Definitely one of the biggest cutie patooties, and he's very likable, which allows us to feel sympathy toward his predicament as the Specter harasses him. A supposed spirit of a former player isn't exactly original, well, and we're going to get into that more next. But it is the kind of thing that makes sense. A spirit feeling unrest and not wanting their record being broken definitely warrants haunting, and it's just as understandable that it actually turns out to be the best friend rather than the spirit. Bob may have been doing something bad, but in his mind he was protecting the legacy of someone important in his life that's no longer there. I find I feel more sympathy toward him than the episode gives him grace for. He's pretty energetic for his age though. It's surprising he can move around so quickly given that we're supposed to believe he's old enough that his best friend is no longer with us, probably because of old age. It's kind of sad that he might end up spending his final years locked away now, his own reputation tarnished. Is this a Bob Taylor defense video? Something I love about the design of the Specter is that his legs look more like skeleton legs. You can see right through them the same as your leg bones, and I do wonder how Mr. Taylor pulled that off. Having watched so many classic episodes lately, they kind of just spent 5 seconds explaining why he did what he did and his reasoning, but none of the greater details of how, like older episodes often would. To really continue the rest of this conversation though, short as this has been, I do think we need to move on to the second half of our double feature. And guess what? Our sports-related Specter in our next episode is also voiced by John Stephenson, just like our Bob Taylor over here. Coincidence? I'm really not so sure, but we'll get into why so that it's more obvious as we continue with this thread. The Scooby-Doo Show, Season 1, Episode 14, The Ghost That Sacked the Quarterback, originally aired December 4th, 1976. Here, our sporty ghost in question is the Rambling Ghost, and he certainly is one of the more iconic monsters to be seen in the Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed museum that didn't get heavily featured or brought to life. Some of them, like the Viking Chief from the video 2 Steps Back, aren't quite as seen or known, but the Rambling Ghost here actually had a full feature on the DVD museum tour that I remember growing up with, and he certainly should be ranked among our scariest villains just for his animated design. But the skeletal way he's brought to life in Monsters Unleashed honestly makes him even scarier with how realistic it looks. This is not an episode I got to grow up with, so I hadn't seen it at the time and was unfamiliar with him, knowing only this design for a lot of my youth. For me, it makes him one of the most memorable to look at in this museum. But what's also notable about the Rambling Ghost is, just like Bob Taylor was voiced by a triumphantly returning John Stephenson, he also voices the Rambling Ghost here. And with how many connections these two episodes have, though without proof, it really makes me think that his noteworthy casting in that What's New episode was a direct reference to the Rambling Ghost specifically, in addition to all of his other iconic villain roles. And even if it wasn't intentional, it still happened anyway, and I think it makes the Unnatural even better and more memorable, more significant to have this amazing tie. And there are more ties as well as we get into the quarterback episode, even despite the sports being different in the episodes. Let's get into this classic together. We open yet again with a stadium, this time for football, where the gang are here cheering for the Hawks. Scooby tries to lead a yell, ends up falling over here, and then gets shot into the trash. While the others cheer for star player Flash Granger, Scooby meets our Rambling Ghost. He tries to tell the others, but nobody gets it, and Flash does his big one with a touchdown, resulting in fireworks. The Hawks' mechanical mascot flies in, which seems a little excessive and expensive, while Flash is being carried off by his teammates. That is, until this smoke rolls in, kind of like the fog in the Unnatural, and when it passes, Flash is nowhere to be seen, the mascot flying home. They hear a terrifying laugh and look up to see the Rambling Ghost, threatening as Scoob says, "I told you so," and then vanishing into thin air. The police found nothing, and Velma states the obvious of the ghost being related to Flash's disappearance. Obviously that means we have a mystery, so they head to see Mr. Prentice, the owner of the Hawks. He explains that in the 30s, a player already called the Rambling Ghost when he was alive cursed the stadium after being booed off the field. The dude was never seen again after that, until tonight, Mr. Prentice believes, certain he's the ghost. Sure would be ironic since the name came in life.
Like we'd better ramble before the Rambler gets us.
Mr. Prentice says the ghost took Flash because it's impossible for them to win without him. He worries that he'll be wiped out with how frightened fans are. The next night, they investigate the area where Flash vanished, and another player says they should leave. The coach says that's Flash's replacement, Crunch Connors. So the suspicious girls go to talk to him, but he just vanishes into thin air? And who does appear? The Rambling Ghost, obviously. The boys run the opposite way and lose him, so everyone splits up to look for clues. The boys get the training room, Scooby on the lockers.
Nothing.
Finally, he realizes he saw the ghost and checks again, finding nothing. But while helping Shaggy, the ghost pops out to screw with them more just as Shaggy finds some newspaper. The ghost tries to retrieve it, which he calls his, but they ride off into the steam room, come out shrunken somehow. Sound familiar? Head to the showers and come back out normal. They fall into a whirlpool bath, and they fly out when the ghost returns. Conveniently, the others are there, and they tell them about the newspaper and ghost. When they want to leave and Fred asks if they're babies, well... Fred Fred has Scooby stick his nose around the scoreboard room to check, and he does stick it, finding a man though. They specifically find Mr. Ellsworth, the scoreboard operator, disheveled like the room. He says the rambling ghost attacked him, and they think he's come back, but it turns out to be another player who came to see about his name being spelled right and hid when he saw the Phantom. They head back to the field to recreate Crunch's disappearance. Scooby taking on the role, slipping through tires and rolling right into vanishment, and then he pops back again and again until they realize there's a trap door, which doesn't really explain the outright vanishing, but sure.
What's down there?
Like she means besides you, Scoob.
They find tunnels, which makes sense to them as Mr. Prentice apparently said this stadium was built over the old one. Sound familiar? Yeah, the Unnatural is very much a mirror to this episode.
Like, can't we say we did and don't?
They split up with two different tunnels though, Fred and Daft taking the other.
Ladies first.
Ladies first. What are you, a scaredy cat?
They come upon a dead end, but there's a ladder and they uncover the old dusty Wall of Fame, closed down when the new stadium was built. They get a super shock when they find the rambling ghost right there at the desk, doing something with the newspaper from earlier. Upon Velma suggesting someone go get it, they try to gang up on her, but Scooby loses in a game of rock, paper, scissors to make it fair. He does his best to scoot over and use his tail to inch it away while the others give him signals, ultimately getting a painful paperclip to the tail and exposing him. The jolt sends the paper into Velma's hands anyway, resulting in a chase that ends with them falling through a trap door. The spook laughs as he locks them in, Flash and Crunch also being stuck down here, and neither of them remembers how they got there. Velma pulls a Fred and sits Scooby in a canvas bag, stuffs some air in, and pops it with a hairpin, shooting Scooby through the trap door and allowing him to get a rope. They present the newspaper to Mr. Prentice, who recognizes himself and the coach with the rest of their old coaching staff in the circled photo, but he's got no idea about the relevance. They have the papers say the players disappearing was a publicity stunt and practice is continuing to lure out the ghost, with the boys dressed up as Flash and Crunch. Fred shows them their trick football that will inflate itself if they can get it down the ghost's shirt, and it seems the ghost is right on time. The boys run right into him, catch the football which Shaggy stuffs into Scooby's shirt for later, and then start driving all over the field. Unfortunately, they drive right into a truck, falling right into the ghost's hands. For a second, because they drive back out with him now on the back. He escapes through the exit, and the boys land in the shark float where the ghost happened to hide. So Scoob stuffs the football in his shirt and it inflates as planned, blowing him over onto the field, and the float drives over, catching him finally. Mr. Prentice joins for the unmasking, shockingly revealing Mr. Ellsworth, the scoreboard operator. It's a double unmasking though, revealing Buck Bender under this one of the former coaches in that newspaper photo who Mr. Prentice had fired, which he wanted revenge for. The player earlier had seen him duck in as Ellsworth to fake an attack. He had used smoke from the fireworks to hide that he used the mascot to fly down and abduct Flash. Mr. Prentice gives them all free tickets for tomorrow as thanks, and they get to see the big Hawks win dedicated directly to them. Flash tosses the game ball to Scoob as thanks, which he accidentally bites down on, exploding and flying over here again, then shooting over for his grand finale. And that's the ghost that sacked the quarterback. This is definitely an interesting but solid episode of the Scooby-Doo show's initial season. The design of the rambling ghost in the show proper is actually a really memorable design, very fitting to stand among the scariest villains that have so often popped up in this particular series. Various players of the team vanishing gives him credibility toward being potentially dangerous instead of just being a freak as well. And now watching them back to back, you can see why a lot of people consider The Unnatural to sort of be a remake of this episode, just with the sport switched around. They even have the same reveal about the stadium being built over the old one and looking around the remains after falling through a trap door. Literally the exact same thing. There are a lot of differences between the episodes, but there really are a lot of interesting similarities as well, even beyond that. It would be one thing for one or two similarities given that sports stories would tend to be similar by nature, but that these two really are feeling like total deja vu makes it a lot harder to deny how intentional it was as a tribute, and I think that makes the inclusion of John Stephenson, voice of the Rambling Ghost, all the more noteworthy in The Unnatural. The reveal of who the ghost is this time works well enough. We meet Ellsworth to set him up, and we know that the newspaper is important and that someone in the photo is probably a likely suspect when we see it circled, but the double reveal helps add some additional shock value. There are a lot of funny gags in the episode as well. I laughed several times, like when Fred closes the locker after pulling Shaggy out, not realizing Scooby is there until after he closes it. I also really like the fairly long sequence of Scooby trying to get the newspaper from the ghost. It has both tension and humor pulled off well. Even with my disinterest in sports, this is another one that does well to hold my attention, so I would say you really can't go wrong with a double feature of both. The only thing I question this time is why Mr. Prentice just lets the gang into his home and tells them all of that history. They really must be famous mystery solvers in this world. There really isn't too much more to say about this one though. When it comes to a lot of the classic episodes, it really is about how interesting the ghost is. Well, I think that wraps us up for the moment. Hopefully now that we've looked at these together, you can see why they make such a good double feature when paired up like this. Even though I've watched both of these episodes over and over, somehow I never connected that they had such similarities, and that the Unnatural was such a tribute to the Rambling Ghost episode. But when you think about it, it really does actually make sense. Changing the sport helps to make it a little fresher, and still including the voice of the Rambling Ghost, especially someone as iconic as John Stephenson, to still sort of be the villain again, really ties it in as a beautiful tribute. If it wasn't intentional for that part, it's kind of a beautiful and perfect coincidence. And all the better if that was the point. And I thought it was something pretty special to point out either way, because it made me gain a new appreciation for a What's New episode that I already loved. Doing an updated and sort of remake episode can fall pretty flat, which has happened for Scooby before several times in the modern day, but I think the Unnatural succeeds in executing this, making it something new again, while still keeping some of the bones, pun intended this time, like the underground stadium. The baseball Specter also really looks nothing like the Rambling Ghost, only having skeletal legs that might somewhat be arguable, and I think that also really helps set them apart as their own special entities, because both of them have equally stuck in my mind without ever even relating them. Maybe I just conflated the two episodes in my head when it came to the details and never thought any different, given that there are so many episodes of Scooby over the decades anyway. If you haven't seen one of these episodes in a while, or shockingly, if you haven't seen one of them at all, I hope you do check them both out. They easily are both standout episodes from the first seasons of their respective series for me. I think that about wraps us up though this time. If you like reminiscing about the scariest villains of Scooby, I've got a whole playlist of videos that might do something similar for you in the same vein. Coming up after this, I've got another double feature that you might enjoy if you like this one, and plenty of other recent videos that you might want to check out. The Viking video kind of flopped really bad. Wherever you decide to land, I'll see you in the futuristic world of the 2000s soon. Bye!